Hey guys, it's Sophie, and I wanted to take a minute of your time to talk a little bit about the terms associated with the transgender discussions that are all over the news media and social media. I don't really want to get into like whether you're for it or you're against it and like arguing about, inclusion or not inclusion. That's really not what this is about. What I want this to be about is about the terms themselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some terms. I have some sources, and I will cite those as well, and kind of go through all of the terms to let you know what they are. Maybe give you like a little bit of background information on them, so that you're aware of like what's going on when you're doing these things, when you're like actually having these discussions. Whether you're for transgender inclusion or whether you're against it, that really doesn't matter for this video. This information is extremely important for everyone. I think that if you're going to formulate an opinion, that you should probably be knowledgeable on that area that you're formulating. And I found that a lot of people aren't knowledgeable with it, and it's not anybody's fault. I mean, the majority of people probably haven't ever like really dealt with this before. We've been around for forever, but a lot of us hide, and a lot of us don't ever really like come out with it, and we're such a small percentage of the population that, I mean, that's understandable. So I didn't make this to like make fun of anybody or to like insult anybody's intelligence. I just really want to like get the information out there. So let's begin. So let's start this off by talking about sexual orientation, because sexual orientation doesn't have anything to do with gender identity, and a lot of people get that confused. So you can be transgender and you can still hold any of the other sexualities like gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual. You can still hold all of these sexual preferences, sexual orientations. That doesn't have to change, and that doesn't put you at odds with your actual gender identity. Gender identity is how we perceive ourselves. So I perceive myself as a female, therefore I am a female. It's how my brain works, it's how I see myself. It's just how things are. It's not something I can change. It's not something that I can be influenced the other way. It's not something I can fight against. It's just the way things are in my mind. Whereas your biological sex is much different than gender identity. So biological sex is what you were like born as. What we like to call it is what you were assigned at birth. So for instance, I was assigned male at birth, which means that when I was born, the doctor said, "This is a boy," and that's what they put on the birth certificate. But that's at odds with my gender identity. So those two things are incongruent. And that's what transgender is. So transgender is when that gender identity and your biological sex don't match, when they're incongruent. Okay, that's all transgender is. It doesn't have anything else to it. It's just there's an incongruence between your sex and your gender. Now, when you want to talk about like what I hear everybody say all the time is normal people. Well, I'm normal. I just happen to be transgender. I do everything anybody else does. I have the same problems. I deal with the same daily tasks. I live my life in a good way. I try to be nice to people. I'm just as normal as anyone else. So instead of saying normal, what they say is cisgender. Now what cisgender is it basically means that your gender identity and your biological sex, they match. So if I was born male and my gender identity, the way I perceived myself, also was male, then I would be cisgender. It's not an insult. It's not anything like that. It's just a state of being. It's just like transgender. It's pretty much the opposite of the spectrum from transgender. Gender expression is kind of the way that I express myself to the world. It's the way that we all present ourselves, whether you're transgender or cisgender. And it's like a sliding scale. So on one end of the spectrum, you may have like manly men. And on the other side of the section, you might have like the most feminine of women. In between there, you have things like tomboy and I'm making this like super like simplified because it's actually a lot deeper than that. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that gender expression and your gender presentation don't necessarily have to match your gender identity. It really depends on what makes you comfortable. And when your gender expression and your gender presentation don't necessarily match what society expects from you, that's called gender nonconformance, okay, or gender nonconforming. And what that just means is that you're not like living up to the expectations that our culture and our society have placed for you, based off of what gender you are, or what biological sex you are, depending on who is perceiving you. And if you don't meet those like gender roles, basically, then you're considered gender nonconforming. Now that happens a lot, even in like the cisgender population, where you have people on both people of both genders who decide that they want to wear clothing of the other gender, or they want to wear makeup, or they don't want to wear makeup, or they want to do something that is stereotypically not something that someone in their gender would do. And so that nonconformance is all around us, but society as a whole and our culture as a whole doesn't really appreciate that so much. The gender roles and the gender stereotypes that we've put in place are very strong. It's what we've been taught since the beginning of time, since before you were born. Pink is for girls and blue is for boys. Girls play with dolls, boys play with trucks. It's just the way things have been for so long that it's concrete in our minds. So gender nonconformance is actually a really big deal to a lot of people, and it really shouldn't be. Now that we've talked a little bit about what transgender is, I want to introduce you a little bit to the people, like what we refer to the people who are transgender as. So I am a transgender woman. So what that means is that I was assigned male at birth, and now I am transitioning to be female. So that makes me a transgender woman. Whereas if I had been assigned female at birth and I was transitioning to male, then I would be a transgender man. So the way that you refer to us is basically you say that we're transgender because we are. That's an adjective. And then whatever our end result is. So for me, again, I would be a transgender woman. This can also be referred to as male to female, MTF, or female to male, FTM. It sounds really like clinical, and I know there's a lot of transgender people who use that. And there's a lot of transgender people who don't even want you to call them transgender. They just want you to call them what they are. There's a lot of different like beliefs on that, and I don't really have the time to like discuss it in this video, but I would like to get to that at some point. So if you're interested, let me know. Gender dysphoria is what you get like when you go see a counselor, like a social worker or a psychologist for therapy. They diagnose you with gender dysphoria, and what that means basically is that the fact that you're transgender and that your gender and your sex aren't congruent, they don't work together, it gives you this dysphoric feeling. And it's hard to like explain the way it feels, but it's horrible. And so it's a symptom, gender dysphoria is a symptom of a physical problem, which would be your gender and your sex not matching. There's a lot of ways that that can happen. Again, that's not for this video. If you're interested in that, please leave it in the comments, and I'll try to get around to doing that. But gender dysphoria is a very real thing. So that brings us to transitioning, because what is the only way to like really ease gender dysphoria? And that's to actually change your gender expression and live by your gender identity. Now, in our society that's frowned upon, they don't really appreciate that. And so it brings up a lot of problems for transgender people regarding like trying to fit in and trying to make friends and just trying to be productive in a community. It makes it a lot harder for us, but it's not impossible. So regardless of all those hardships, that I've faced, I feel much better as who I am today, and I wouldn't go back and change anything. But my transition is going to be different from everyone else's. So, in my transition, for instance, I went to counseling first and I went to therapy for forever. And then I got given a prescription for hormone pills. And I wasn't like sure if I wanted to do it. And I was scared. And I was thinking that pretty much if I do this, my life is over. And if I don't do this, my life is over. Like, who's going to love me? Who's going to want to like be with me, who's going to want to hire me. And so, but I decided to do it anyway because I really, really felt like I needed to. So I've been on hormone pills for, gosh, at the taping of this, probably about 18 months now. And it's been wonderful. I'm still dysphoric though. There's still things that I want done, but it doesn't matter to like being transgender. So like I'm transgender regardless of whether I ever go on hormones or regardless of whether I ever have a surgery. Just that incongruence of gender and biological sex are what make you trans. So I might not be comfortable with just hormones and I might need something else. But there's another trans person that might just be comfortable on hormones. And then there's another trans person who might not even want hormones. They might just want to live their life as the gender that they identify with and not worry about any of that. It all depends on what helps to ease your personal gender dysphoria. So, transition is completely different for every single person. So just because somebody decides they don't want to have hormones, that doesn't mean they're not transgender. Now we're going to talk about the word transsexual. Now, transsexual is basically, well, it's really a debated word. There's a lot of like anger between a lot of different groups over this word because for one, it's like super clinical. It's been adopted from the term transsexualism, which was the like state of being trans medically for forever. I'm sure it probably still is in the books somewhere, but I didn't really look that up. So transsexual is in my mind, and not in everybody's, but in my mind, transsexual is someone who has whose gender identity and biological sex are incongruent, and that who has actually begun to transition from one sex to another. So, under that term, I would be a transsexual. There's a lot of different like versions of the term. A lot of people use things like true transsexual or late transitioner. There's a lot of like argument over the term in the community and outside the community even. I don't use it personally for me because I find that transsexual ends up sounding a lot worse than transgender, and when people don't really understand what it is, then they assume that's something bad because the word sex is in it. So I get this asked of me a lot is what is a crossdresser? So a crossdresser is someone who dresses like the opposite sex, but doesn't necessarily have an incongruence of sex and gender. It may be a man that was born a man that identifies as a man, but for some reason decides that it's necessary to dress in women's clothing on a temporary basis. This isn't like a full-time thing like me, where I'm always dressed as a woman. This is something that's done sporadically or when need be to like express femininity or to express masculinity, depending on what gender is cross-dressing. It really has nothing to do. A lot of people say it's under like the transgender umbrella, but it really doesn't have anything to do with gender identity. A lot of transgender people will say, you know, early on in my transition, I was cross-dressing and this and that, but that's really not true because you were wearing things that were congruent with your gender identity. So you're not a cross-dresser. It's often used as a derogatory term. I've been called crossdresser a lot, and it's used as a derogatory way to make fun of me, um, and so that's hurtful to a lot of transgender people. So I generally try to stay away from the term crossdresser. Another term that we don't really like in the transgender community, for the most part, is transvestite. So what a transvestite is that someone who dresses in the clothes of the opposite sex, basically like cross dresses, but they do it for some sort of sexual gratification. Um, this ends up being the way that most people think about transgender people, is that we're doing it to be sexually active or for whatever reason, and that's not true. I don't receive any sort of like sexual pleasure from dressing up and living the life that I live. That's not it. In fact, the hormones that I take really dampen that anyway. So if I was doing this for some sort of like a sexual thrill or a sexual gratification, I would definitely be doing this all wrong. Finally, I really want to talk a little bit about slurs. Now, in this video, I've talked a little bit about things that could be considered undesirable terms that could be used against us in the incorrect way. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about actual slurs. Slurs are never cool. They're never good for anybody. They're just meant to demean somebody. There's usually quite a bit of power behind them because of things that have happened and the whole reason that they're there in the first place. The most obvious slur that comes to mind in my head is tranny. So tranny is always used to demean us. I have been called that more times than I care to elaborate on. It's a dangerous and an angry word that almost means violence to us, because usually the people who commit violent acts on us use words like those. It's not something that I would ever say to anyone else. It's not how I would describe myself, and I would hope that nobody would say that to me. Another slur would actually be like regular pronouns. So it happens to me every once in a while where I will run into somebody who I normally look like this. And so, I mean, I think I look okay. I usually pass all right. So I will run into people though, and they'll call me he, and they'll call me sir, and I correct them, but it shouldn't really get to that. I mean, do I really look like a he? Do I really look like a sir? And I don't think I do. I find more often than not, when I correct them, that it comes out that they were trying to be disrespectful and they were trying to upset me. And that's uncalled for. There's really no need for that. You know, it doesn't cost anything to be nice. It doesn't cost anything to be decent. So why don't you treat everybody that way? If you stuck with me this far through the video, I wanted to thank you. You've let me kind of voice my concern that there aren't enough people that really understand the terminology that they're spitting out, and I'm hoping that maybe you've learned something. It's a good day anytime we learn something new, and it shouldn't be seen as like a deficit to have to learn something. Everybody's ignorant of something. There's plenty of subjects that I don't know anything about, and I wouldn't be upset if somebody was to teach me. So these are the terms. There's way more. If you want like more of this, let me know. You can reach me either on my Facebook page at Trans Space Mission, so that's transmission with a space in between, or you can send me a message here on YouTube. I answer all of my comments. I answer all of my messages. So if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, please let me know. Hopefully, like I said, hopefully this has taught you something. And hopefully in the future, whether you're for or against the transgender movement, you at least have a better understanding of how to address and express your opinions. So thank you so much for paying attention, and I guess I'll see you in the next video.